Thanks very much, Trudy. Good morning. Dan Delmar in for Elias Makos. We're going to jump right back into things right now. And coming up on the program, we have a lot to get to. So Brenda O'Farrell is on deck, of course, about the Île Torture Bridge. Brenda is of the 1019 report. We'll get the latest there as people head back to work. David Hertel is on deck as well with his usual political column. We will talk about buying gold at Costco. That's coming up on the show. And we're going to end it with a really amazing story that was in La Presse over the last few days. A farmer by the name of Daniel Bonnet and his wife Maryse, both blind, both having sight issues, and both started a farm from scratch. It's a duck egg farm, and they just had a few ducks to start, and they're now at 250,000 eggs every year, and they just had a dragon investor come in. And we'll talk to Danielle, the farmer, and Sébastien, the investor, later in the program. First, though, I think we obviously have to cover healthcare. And it's been a very rough holiday season for those who have needed ER attention. The minister is saying, avoid the ER if you can, but obviously some people cannot. Lisa Goldman is a local journalist and editor, and she joins us actually from the hospital right now. She's had a very rough few nights, and I appreciate your time, Lisa. How are you?
Good morning. I'm much better now that I have my own room and dedicated care.
Okay. I don't want to be too insensitive here, but do you want to tell me vaguely what happened?
Yeah, sure. I had some pretty serious and rare after effects, post-operative complications. I had a very normal surgery at the end of November, and only 1% of patients have these complications. I fell into the 1%. It was nobody's fault. But I couldn't keep any food or liquid down for several days. I was vomiting a lot every day and fainting a lot. And the last time I fainted was Sunday morning, the 19th. I bit through my tongue when I fainted, and then I came to the ER, presenting these very serious complications. And I have to say, the nurses and the doctors are incredible. I think they're heroes, but they're fighting against the system. You hear 200% capacity, and it sounds pretty theoretical, but when you experience sitting in an emergency room with these really serious complications, waiting for a hospital bed for 5 days, sleeping on a gurney in an open reception area, surrounded by people in terrible states of misery, with doctors just rushing from one patient to the next, and nurses as well. I mean, I didn't have a pillow. I was on a gurney so narrow and so hard that I couldn't turn over. I was attached to an IV. I had to call a nurse to detach me from the IV every time I went to use a public toilet. And that's the way life was for 5 nights in a brightly lit emergency room. There wasn't even a separate cubicle. Like, you're just surrounded by the swirl of humanity as you're lying there vomiting and fainting and waiting for an emergency room. And the doctors and nurses doing their damned best to treat you.
Wow. I think our listeners can see why I wanted to have you on the program, Lisa. You're an excellent writer, and what you're describing there is really vivid and scary. So 5 nights on a gurney in the hallway. Wow.
Yep. And being taken off for pretty serious tests like MRIs and endoscopies. And, after these very serious and sometimes traumatic tests, like having an endoscopy, as anyone knows, is no fun. It's when they put a tube down your throat with a camera to look at your stomach. And then they take you back to the ER because there's still no room, no bed available. So what I see is these doctors and nurses just battling against a system that's been radically defunded and is collapsing, and they're doing everything they can with, I have to say, incredible compassion toward patients. I actually don't know where they find these reserves of compassion given the circumstances they're working with. And again, I read in the papers and I heard on the news that ERs were at 200% capacity, but until you've experienced it, you don't know what that means. My sister came to sit with me, and it was like, she said, it's like being in a new circle of hell from Dante. It was completely unbelievable. And honestly, I think, I lived in the States for 15 years, and I've lived in many countries. I've traveled as a journalist, and I can tell Canadian listeners that they do not want the American system. They don't want a system where what happened to a friend of mine when their daughter got an acute rare form of cancer, even though they were fully insured, the co-pays and the extra treatments cost so much that they had to remortgage their house. People go bankrupt even if they have insurance. And I think the Canadians should be out on the street demonstrating, marching, because if this healthcare system collapses, they're all going to feel the pain pretty hard.
You anticipated my next question. You're someone with progressive values, and I wonder. I was wondering if you can still defend the system, or if you think that there's maybe a private sector, public-private partnership, or something along those lines that might be able to help the system. Do you think private does have a role to play, or should we just double down on the public system?
I think we should throw money at the public system. The Americans, they spend trillions of dollars, far more money per capita than Canadians do on the healthcare system, and it's still a catastrophe there. I think that profit-driven medicine is an evil thing, and I think that this government is deliberately defunding the public system, so that people will say, "Well, I guess it just doesn't work, that public medicine. I guess we just can't afford it. Therefore, we need to have a private system." I think that's just demonstrably untrue. And I think that I'm sure that the data is there to show it. The studies are there to show that. And I think the Canadians should demand that their government refund this system, which can work perfectly well. There's no reason it shouldn't work. I think it's just an ideologically driven policy to defund the system, so the Canadians will say, "Well, I don't want to wait 2 years or 3 years for my hip operation, so I'll just pay, $18,000 out of my own pocket to have it done." Or I'll buy private insurance and have it done.
This story is hitting home for me, Lisa, not just because I know you. We had coffee that one time, but because I was actually nearly in the ER myself. I was sick with gut inflammation stuff. And if I didn't go private, if I didn't spend a whack of money for the first time in my life, I spent money on private tests, on an MRI and a colonoscopy. Several, I won't go into details, but it was too much. It was more than I should have spent. But I did that to avoid what you're going through. And I feel like I may have ended up there as well if I didn't get those answers, if I didn't spend the money early and did that. And I feel guilt about that, to be honest. I feel sad. In the days where I was really sick and lost a lot of weight, I felt sad that others who don't have a credit card, a room on their credit card, can't just go to the local clinic and get an appointment literally the next day, Lisa. The next day.
Absolutely. And you know what? I've done the same thing, and I feel guilty about that too. When I had the choice between waiting 2 weeks to have blood tests and get the results for a condition that was making me really nervous, or going to a private blood lab and paying too much money, but there was something that I could afford. It wasn't pleasant to pay it, but I could afford it. But I look around me at the people in the ER, and these are a lot of the people in the ER, they don't have any money. These are very, very poor people. And again, the doctors and the nurses showed equal care and compassion for everyone. But not everyone has the option of taking a couple $100 out of their bank account using their debit card to pay for blood tests. And, to see also, I have to say that in the ER, if the system had been functioning properly, a lot of the people who were brought to the ER really should have been treated at dedicated clinics. If you've sprained your ankle, or you've been beaten up on the street during a pub brawl, or, you've got a severe cold, you shouldn't have to sit in the ER for 36 hours to see a nurse or a doctor. And that's what's happening, because what you see in the ER is where the system is so weak and collapsing. And so, people have, relatively minor conditions, and their only option is to go to the ER. And often, the police will pick them up and they'll say, "Well, I guess we'll just take them to the ER." And if there were a system of clinics, then people wouldn't have to go to the ER, and there wouldn't be all this pressure on the doctors and nurses in the ER. Some of whom, one nurse, I have to say, on the third day in the gurney in the corridor, I did break down and cry a bit. It was just too much. And this one nurse who said she's been in the ER for 17 years came over and held my hand for a second, and she said, "C'est pas humain, ça. It's not humane. This is an inhumane system."
Lisa, thanks so much for your time. I'm wishing you a speedy recovery, and hopefully now that you're in there and you're seeing the specialist, we can get this wrapped up and get you back home soon. Lisa Goldman, she is a local journalist and editor. You can also follow her on Twitter. Her handle is, I'll just double check that. Lisa, what's your Twitter handle?
It's Lisa N for Naomi G. Lisa NG at x.com or twitter.com.
Excellent. You can follow her for some pretty solid political commentary as well. Lisa, best of luck.
Thank you very much. It was nice speaking with you.
Likewise.